Hello, and welcome to our Executive Women's Series event. This month, we have all celebrated International Women's Day. And to continue this theme, we've got a remarkable panel of female leaders joining us, as well as our partners at Thrive Global. Thrive Global is a leading behaviour change technology company that helps organisations and individuals unlock their full potential by reducing stress and burnout and improving well-being, productivity and mental resilience. My name is Belinda Purkiss. I lead global delivery for Asia Pacific at State Street. My distinguished panellists are Sally Collins, Chief Operating Officer for Victoria Funds Management Corp, Fiona Ong, who is Chief People Officer at GIC, and Arianna Huffington, founder and CEO of Thrive Global. We have about 80 participants on this call, and I want to welcome you all and thank you for taking your time. We've just got a few housekeeping things to do first. So firstly, we are recording this session. We have a number of people that are unable to attend but would like to watch, so it will be recorded and available. We are a virtual setting, so with that, I do have to read a short disclaimer. The information contained in this video broadcast is for informational, illustrative, and/or marketing purposes only. The content does not constitute investment research or investment, legal, or tax advice. No permission is granted to reprint, sell, copy, distribute, or modify any material discussed or distributed herein in any form or by any means without the prior written consent of the State Street. On the technology side, we do have, if you notice in your participants drop-down box, you'll see State Street Production. They're there to help you. So if you, while listening in, have any issues, please pop a note into your chat box to State Street Production, and they are there to help you. And the other most important thing is we do want questions coming in. So again, through the chat box, note your questions at any time through this session, and we will allow some time at the end to address as many as we can. So let's get started. Today, we're really looking at the workforce of the future, but we want to put it in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and resiliency of the workforce. And with that, I know, Arianna, I'm going to start with you because that is a theme that you've been championing at Thrive Global, right? So can you share some insights into the global trends you're seeing for employee well-being and for resiliency as part of COVID-19? And, you know, how is Thrive working to address the needs that you're encountering? Arianna, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Belinda. I'm really delighted to be here with you. We are really so excited about our partnership with State Street, and at Thrive, all of us are very committed to the APAC region. We've partnered with Monash University, and we are working with Australia and Singapore and Jakarta, and we look forward to reaching more and more people in the region because all the issues that you mentioned are global issues. Every region has its own particular mindset and challenges, but the issues of burnout and equity and diversity and inclusion and the need for resilience that you mentioned are truly universal. And we are finding that, of course, this is a time of incredible grief and losses for people, personal losses, losses of loved ones, financial losses, but it's also an incredible time of opportunity. Because if you look back at the world we left behind, it was not a world we want to return to. It was really a world where diseases were skyrocketing, especially lifestyle diseases related to stress, like diabetes or hypertension. There was already a mental health crisis that has been exacerbated because of the pandemic. So now what we are finding in our work with many multinational companies that thrive, whether it's Accenture or Walmart or Salesforce, what we are finding is that, in fact, we have now a once-in-a-generation opportunity to redefine the way we work and live and make the connection between the well-being of employees and the performance of the company, and also make the connection between diversity, inclusion, and resilience. And we'll talk more about that, Belinda. But I think this is what is exciting about these times. Nobody wants to go back. We want to go forward and use the pandemic as a portal to go through and imagine and build a new and better world. And a lot of companies are doing an amazing job at that, especially in the financial services industry, which traditionally, let's face it, had been fueled by burnout. But now many people in the industry are seeing the connection between well-being and productivity, the productivity paradox, if you want, where, contrary to what we believed, powering through exhaustion and burnout is not the way to be more productive and achieve better results.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I guess that brings us to, within the financial sector, as you said, and everything that has been done there. And there's this phrase, workforce of the future. And I think we're all very familiar with that phrase and the many dimensions that it brings. So, within the financial services, I'll pivot to you, Sally, and, I'd like to get your perspective on what workforce of the future in the financial services looks like to you, and some of the changes we're going to have to make to attract top talent in this industry.
Thanks so much, Belinda. I think if you'd asked me this question 12 or 13 months ago, I would have said key drivers for financial services workforce of the future: digital, automation, AI, data and analytics, and workplace technology for the maybe 30% of people who work flexibly. Fast forward 15 months, all of those drivers are true. However, the last ones, not 30%, we've had a global immersion in remote and flexible working, which is fantastic because we needed that. For those of us who've done it in our careers, we know for people who've never done it, it's hard for them to believe sometimes that you can work effectively and productively in a remote or flexible way. And that is so critical. I think we could have gone for another 100 years and not achieved through programs or training what we've achieved through that shared experience over the last 12 months. That's a real gift. And I think that with our work environment that, as we know it now, forever disrupted, organisations who will attract talent are those who are going to set themselves apart by being able to truly offer flexible working, to really value it, live it and bring it to life, not just talk about it. So I think it's an incredibly important component of the future workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And Diana, just following on from that and your perspective from a people's element, organisations have to adopt to that future of work. What do they need to do?
Yeah, I think if I just look at the effects of COVID with the lockdowns and restricted mobility, people have been working hours at home while simultaneously dealing with the stress and anxiety of caring for their families. So organizations need to extend support for employees' mental and emotional well-being. And at GIC, we encourage the ABCDE principles of how to think about this. So A is about being adaptable, how we need to adapt to new circumstances and embrace new ways of working, right, to sustain performance. So we've got something which we put together called Resilience for Performance, really to help employees understand the art and science of building resilience so that they can remain purpose-driven, both professionally and also personally in their daily lives. We think about balance, that's the B, and it's about setting boundaries for work and rest when we work from home. And that's where you see a lot of blurring of the lines when this happens. C is for connecting with others and really using platforms like Zoom, not just for work, but coming together to have a chat, to bond over drinks and to play games. We need to find more intentional ways for bringing people together. D is on delivering on outcomes. We're all here. We have goals to achieve. But there are also situations where we need to adjust our priorities and how we can be more agile in dealing with uncertainty. D is for energy. It's about engaging people to develop great habits, how we can be more, how this can be more sustainable from a physical standpoint, mental and emotional. And this is about how we can engage and how people can be their best selves at work and at home. And I think post-COVID and beyond, when things get back to a better normal and steady state, there is going to be a fundamental shift of how we need to think about reforming ways of work to embrace greater flexibility, as Sally has mentioned. It's also about building trust and giving people more autonomy. I see a significant shift for working from home, but I also see the office remaining the hub of where people come together as teams. And it's important to maintain this connection and bonding for brainstorming types of discussions, for innovation, because you help to reduce the feelings of isolation and cabin fever. And at the same time, find ways to allow people to take ownership and take accountability for outcomes. So I think to sum up, D&I is really a business imperative for performance, and inclusion allows us to get diverse perspectives together to make better decisions. And we have to enable and trust people with that care and accountability. Something Arianna said, it's not about avoiding stress, but for me, it's about learning and finding coping mechanisms to recover from this stress. And the more we learn about it and one another, the better.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that ABCD in energy, because that seems so foundational to what we have coming our way. And so I'll move on from there to again bringing in the themes of diversity and resilience. But Arianna, your thoughts on the relationship, particularly between diversity and inclusion and well-being and resilience. I think that for many in an organisation, they would think they're different priorities. And I'd like to see, get your view on that.
Well, actually, Belinda, connecting them is absolutely key. Because you're right, on the surface, they seem very different. But we now have a lot of science and a lot of data that shows that when employees are exhausted and running on empty, they are much less likely to help create a culture of diversity and inclusion and belonging. You can still kind of impose it from above with quotas or targets, but then you have a culture that's based on numbers rather than a real cultural transformation. And what Diana said about D&I being a business imperative depends on it being real, on really creating a culture of belonging. So we find that our empathy, our ability to connect with people from diverse religious backgrounds, different gender, different ethnicity, all that is much, much harder when you have not taken care of yourself. So that's why we see that connection between well-being and resilience, in a way kind of putting your own oxygen mask on first. And from that place, you can be much more empathetic, inclusive, and be able to truly connect that culture of belonging and of thriving together.
Absolutely. Thank you. So continuing that theme, and I think coming back, Diana, to some of the things you were saying and what you were doing at GIC, and Arianna, your reference to it is about the person. And so at GIC, delving into a little bit deeper, addressing diversity and inclusion. What are you doing at GIC, and how is it impacting both the person, the employee, and the client?
Yeah, we believe that the key to think about this is to unlock diversity strengths and foster inclusion in a way that contributes to performance. And I can't agree with Arianna enough when she said, this has to be experienced in the day-to-day lives of people in our workplace. And for this, leaders have to be role models and set the tone from the top. And although we're discussing this in conjunction with International Women's Day, I think in reality, diversity traits are very broad. They extend beyond gender and personalities, strengths, cognitive and behavior types of qualities. It also includes how we communicate and how we think, and how past experiences actually shape the way we process information. So diversity on its own is not enough. We need inclusive culture so that we can complement one another's strengths in the workplace and work together to be a more powerful team. And being inclusive is about fostering a greater sense of belonging and also valuing the contributions of others for better outcomes. I like this analogy. We always talk about D&I as coming to the party, but also being invited to the dance floor and being able to dance well. And we need for each of us to be empowered to be our best selves at work and also at home. For employees, Belinda, you asked, I think it's about investing in our strengths, because the key to human potential is building on what we are already doing well. And growth is not just about building new capabilities, but also increasing impact in areas where we already have the strengths. And in a similar way, thinking about where we might have gaps and finding ways to complement these gaps by working with others who have strengths in these areas. So I think all of us have talents that are natural strengths. And the more we understand about these superpowers, like the Avengers, the better we can apply these talents. And at GIC, we use tools like Strengths Finders to help people assess where their natural talents lie. And also, when you look at these strengths across a team, you can complement one another better. In organizations like us, mission that success is team-based. We need to put in the effort and skills, but what gets us further for performance is building meaningful relationships with others, including our clients, in a way that cements confidence and trust. So to do that, both internally and externally, it's about building meaningful relationships by recognizing strengths and finding ways to collaborate for the greater good, having different views and being open to constructive debate with candor, and also looking at how we can contribute, but at the same time depending on one another within the ecosystem to be more successful as a team. And you think about it in the context of a portfolio, right? With a diversified investment portfolio, you get better returns. In the same way, when you diversify within the team, we get better outcomes. So inclusiveness, collaboration, and candor, I think, the key to this interdependent environment.
Thank you. And I'd like to drill a little bit further, particularly on the employee side. And I'll bring you in, Sally. A lovely phrase that we often hear is bring your whole self to work. And what does that mean for you? And what are some of the tools that you're arming your leaders to create that inclusive workplace that is so important?
Thanks, Belinda. I think it's an incredibly important topic for leadership. But I was just reflecting, actually, as Deanna was talking about the things that she's doing and how that's coming to play in her workplace. It's also a really foundational part of our culture at VFMC, and one of the reasons I came to work here is that from an executive point of view and our leaders' perspective, that it's highly valued, but it's demonstrated and role modelled. And I think that's a tangible thing, that when people are looking to join organisations, you need to really explore. There's one thing to meet with someone and know how you're going to work together, but there's the other to really understand how are they when it comes to leading people. And I know that for us as an organisation, we really are priding ourselves on that being an important part of our employee value proposition. So we do spend a lot of time trying to develop good, empathetic leaders through providing them with skills similar to what Deanna was talking about, but very much in the coaching space. And to be a good coach, you really need to deeply understand and be empathetic. And so we certainly have spent a lot of time and effort on that, which can be challenging in an asset management firm where people run the money, and that seems to be the number one issue. But we know how incredibly important it is to effective organisations. I think, so, you know, in terms of bringing your whole self to work, that's one. It just initially I thought that's the whole reason I wanted to come and work here. I think the other is that just more broadly, that having being able to do that is all about respect and feeling safe in the workplace and building trust. And that really does require deep empathy. And Arianna was talking about it, you know, quite extensively. The ability for people to think beyond their own life experience is not an obvious thing, but it's a very important thing. And if I just think of an example, you know, in my career where I really felt that crunch, that rub of not being able to bring my true self to work, it was in one of my very first executive leadership roles. And I joined an all-male team. The technology will place the time. We had Blackberries, because one of the quotes was put your Blackberry down. So, you know, about 12 years ago. And I was feeling very self-conscious. I was the only female, you know, in the team. It was our first executive meeting, very formal. And as we came to the end of the time, we were right in the middle of a problem. And the leader said, we're going to work through this for about another 30 minutes. Everybody, Blackberries down, you know, that's it. We're going to get this sorted out. And at the time, I had very young children, and I had to pick up one of my children, and I had to get my Blackberry and get a very important message to my husband to go and pick up my daughter. And so in that moment, I knew that it was tested. I needed to be true to myself and say, hang on a minute, I do need to send a message here but I also was very conscious no one else around that table was a primary caregiver of young children, and it would never, ever have occurred to them that that would be the case. So ninja-like, I got my Blackberry under the table and I got my message out, and, you know, everything was fine. But it really brings to life, I think, for me, a reminder. If that happened now, I would feel very comfortable in a company like FMC to say, well, it wouldn't happen, one. But if it did, to say, hang on a minute, I'll need to send a message I can work through, but here's what I need to do. And people should feel safe and not to feel, hang on, I don't want you to think I'm the person who can't contribute or that I'm any less of a leader. And it's important to talk about these examples because sometimes they still happen. I like to think that was a long time ago, and around financial services executive tables, I hope that doesn't happen anymore, and no women are ninja-like under the table texting. And if you do, I encourage you to call it out because it's really, it's not okay.
Excellent. Arianna, broadening this out beyond the ninjas, as important as they are, what some of the solutions or steps that you recommend to companies also to bring their whole self to work, or to ensure the employees are bringing their whole self to work?
Well, I love what Sally said, and I've been taking copious notes when Deanna and Sally are talking because these are such great points. But I think the role modeling is absolutely key. We find that employees are much more likely to feel safe to bring their whole selves to work if they have cultural permission from the top. So that's why in our Thrive Up that everybody here is going to receive at the end of our session, you'll see a lot of stories from leaders. And Belinda, we have a story from you. We hope we are going to have stories from all the leaders participating because we are finding that to shift behavior, you need the inspiration and motivation that comes from storytelling. And both from your peers and from leaders in the company. And we also find that it's very important to break everything down into what we call micro steps. You see here we have product placement, our new book coming out on Tuesday about micro steps. That behavior change at the individual level and at the company level has to be broken down into actionable daily steps that lead to new healthy habits. Because if we approach it all in a daunting way of a complete overhaul, it's much more likely to create resistance, both at the individual and at the company level. So at the company level, we are finding two things that we practice and bring into the companies we're working with that really work. The first is what we call the entry interview. You know, when you onboard new employees, it's an incredible opportunity to really introduce them into the culture of the company. They want to belong. They want to understand. And yet, companies seem to spend more energy into the exit interview than the entry interview. And the first question in the entry interview, which I'm happy to send you, is what is important to you outside of work? So that way, if you're a working mother, you're going to say what's important to you. I mean, we had a working mother during one of our Accenture entry interviews who said, what's important to me is to be able to take my daughter to school every morning at 7 o'clock. Now, once her manager knew that, it was an important piece of information. Yes, there may be some time when she needed not to take her daughter to school, but nobody minds what they have to do occasionally. What they mind is what they have to do every day. And yet, of course, in her previous job, she had never expressed to her manager that deep desire she had. Especially still now, it's not just when Sally was using her BlackBerry. Even now, women especially just don't want to be seen to be on the mommy track, to be seen to be less of a leader or less willing to go the extra mile. So in order to change that, we need to know that. And that's connected to our second priority, which is what we call compassionate directness. That is actually our number one cultural value. It's inviting everyone. It's actually a big part of our interviewing process before we hire people. Are you able to be direct? Are you able to stand up for yourself, to express when you're not happy about something, when you are frustrated or disappointed? Because what we find in company cultures is that when employees don't express, the resentment, the disappointment simply festers. It doesn't disappear. And either they leave or they become toxic. So given that a company's culture is truly its immune system, I saw that firsthand when I was on the board of Uber, that employees who don't express, employees who are burnt out, are becoming part of the toxic environment in the company culture. So these two things we find make a big difference in giving cultural permission to everyone to bring their whole selves to work.
Thank you so much. I think that if we look at it from the employee's perspective, which you've just done, and it is so incredibly important, but also looking at from the company's perspective. So Diana, I'll go back to you from that relationship between prioritising diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that does for the resiliency of the company as well as that individual. So from your perspective, what does the company get from that?
Yeah. I think there is a significant link between the two, because diversity is about building better teams and complementing strengths so that we have this best of us approach. Equity goes back to the concept of merit and how we need to be fair to people, use objective measures, eliminating unconscious bias, not just conscious bias, and equalizing the playing field for equal opportunity. Inclusion brings it even further, and this is necessary to recognize and value people for who they are. And back to the concept of being our whole selves, we need to be comfortable in our own skin and be confident as well. So if we bring all this together in organizational resilience, I think 5 conditions have to be in place. Clarity and alignment of goals is the first one, because I think teams have to be aligned towards a compelling vision, but also see how this fulfills their individual aspirations. Why we're doing this, how we can contribute to these efforts, and what exactly is my own accountability towards these goals. Second is about creating meaningful relationships, which we talked a bit about. And this means creating a very high level of trust, interpersonal awareness. It also means building a climate of respect, which is part of our value systems. This is about also what Sally talked about, right? Recognizing priorities, not just in a workplace, but also what individuals have to fulfill as part of the responsibilities at homes and with their families, embracing all of that. The third is about honest conversations, and I think Arianna talked about it, the compassionate directness. Because if we work together as teams, how do we harness this collective thinking capacity? By being able to draw up the tough conversations, addressing elephants in the room. And this requires courage, it requires candor to voice opinions that are different from others, and trust that the relationship will not be damaged in the process. And these honest conversations also help us to get to better decisions and buy-in. The fourth area is about learning agility, and this is an important quality, I think, for innovative teams. And it's about creating rituals that allow teams to reflect, evolve ideas, because what got us here is not going to get us there. I've spoken about energy, and I think it's about creating that positive challenge for growth and achievement, but at the same time, looking and understanding at our own stress triggers so that we can sustain ourselves for the journey. So in GIC, we've put in place programs to help managers and teams create these practices with tools for rituals, micro steps. We're looking at what Arianna has been talking about, micro steps, great habits, and also putting in place mechanisms for feedback, because we need to take stock along the way, look at whether there are any trade-offs, insights that can help us to refine as we go.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to, I guess, out of all that has been said, and it's been some amazing messages, and I know that we have an audience that is a mixture of both current and future leaders. And I'm sure they're inspired, and they were before, about transformation and how they transform the financial services industry and where they're actually working today to be more inclusive and to be more diverse. So I'm going to put this out to all three. Sharing your thoughts and giving your advice to those that are in a leadership position and wanting to change company culture around the diverse, equitable and inclusive topics. What are tips for leaders, particularly as they want to get stakeholder buy-in to make that change happen? Arianna, I'll start with you.
So, Belinda, I would say the first priority is a mindset shift. Mm-hmm. When we ask leaders to see the connection between well-being and business imperatives, between well-being and resilience, diversity and inclusion, we are actually asking them to abandon an outmoded mindset, which made us all believe that burnout is simply the price we pay for success. And in a couple of my recent books, I went back and tried to trace how come an entire global culture believes something which is scientifically false. And the reason is that going back to the first industrial revolution, we started kind of revering machines. And if you think of it, the goal with machines is to minimize downtime. And the same with software. Companies brag that this piece of software has 99.999% uptime, but the human operating system is different. For the human operating system, downtime is a feature, not a bug. And all modern science, all the data we collect reinforces that. So does ancient wisdom of any culture, whether it's the Tao or Zen in Japan or the Bhagavad Gita in India or the Stoics in Europe. They all say the same thing, that we have a place of wisdom and strength in us, but we need to just take these little breaks to reconnect with it. And that's why I'm so optimistic about the science of microsteps, because these tiny daily incremental steps truly lead to new habits. And whether it's in the area of sleep or food or movement or gratitude, taking these little steps just transforms our behavior, transforms our health, transforms our productivity. And just to be super practical, I would love to mention my absolute favorite microstep, which is based on the latest neuroscience that tells us that it takes 60 seconds to course correct from stress. As we've already discussed, stress is unavoidable. Nobody can sit here and promise everybody a stress-free existence. But cumulative stress is avoidable. And it is cumulative stress that is the problem. So the 60-second resets, then you'll see inside the app, you have a lot of resets that you can download to focus on your breath, to focus on gratitude, to get up and stretch. You can take 60-second resets between Zooms. You can start your day with a 60-second reset. Instead of going immediately to your phone, so you can set your intention for the day. You can focus on what you want out of your day before you go to your phone, which is what the world wants from you. To end your day with a reset, which for me is taking my phone out of my bedroom so I can disconnect from my day and my problems and all the challenges I'm facing. So I just mentioned a couple of examples. There are hundreds in Thrive's new book because it shows how manageable it is. If you ask people to start with New Year resolutions, they're abandoned by the end of January because they're so big and ambitious. But if you ask them to break it down into what we call micro steps, too small to fail, then you can begin to build a new muscle of success, which encourages us to move forward. And starting so small can lead to big changes around all the big important issues we've been discussing, like diversity, like inclusion, like building both individual and organizational resilience.
Excellent. Thank you. Just before I go to our next panelist, just a reminder, we'll shortly be going to questions. So for those in the audience, if you do have questions, pop them in the chat and we'll be ready for you. So, Sally, following on from that big, bold step.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. When you asked us to think about, tips for people, I look back and think what have been things I wish I knew. And I think the piece of advice I'm going to give is going to require a micro-step reset, definitely, for people to have the courage to do this, because I'm asking something that's a bit courageous. But and I'd like you to think about it this way. So I really love the Peter Drucker saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it is so telling. And if you think about diversity and inclusion policies as strategy, if that's what we want to achieve as an organisation, if you look around you and the leaders are not supportive of that, not role modelling that, not intentionally helping that to happen, then they're eating it for breakfast and they won't go anywhere. And so what it requires is courage and people to be brave to call that out and to have the conversation. So my tip is, in line with, I guess, International Women's Day theme of choose to challenge, is for people to challenge when they see that. But my tip is in financial services, the way to do it is through ESG. So if you think about the lens that many jurisdictions now all around the world in capital markets are placing, the lens that they're placing on organisations to receive investment is, are you complying and do you have functional sound practices around diversity and inclusion, and where's the data behind that? So if you have a leader who naturally doesn't bring that perspective or that viewpoint or has that life experience, they've never been told not to use their phone in a meeting and they're worried that their child's by the side of the road, then the way to get to them is to think about it in terms that does immediately hit their buttons and does appeal to them. And I think the commercial element of the expectations for organisations who have good diversity and inclusion practices, because we know they lead to more profitable organisations, is the way to challenge people. And so that would be my tip. Go forth, be brave and challenge on that basis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that challenge. So, Deanna, finally for you, tips for transforming.
Yeah, I would think about mitigating unconscious bias, because intentions may be good, as we talked about, but we can be unaware of our own, and this leads to bad execution. So we need to have both good intentions and good execution by guarding against these biases. It's going to be a learning journey, and we need to hold leaders accountable, setting the tone from the top, making it part of our leadership expectations, because I think this is the most critical part of the ecosystem. If leaders don't do it, they lose the credibility to get everybody else aligned. So it starts with the leaders, and everybody has to then internalize it and say it starts with me, and what can I do to make a difference? And this leads to also living the D&I culture and making it part of our day-to-day by creating learning journeys, sharing authentic stories so that we can all experience how this comes to life. For GIC, when we celebrated the International Women's Day, it was how to connect meaningful relationships across the organization, how to celebrate other colleagues in their strengths, and how to commit small actions in each of us to build a more inclusive workspace. And I think it's absolutely essential to acknowledge that we're not perfect, but we're willing to learn fast, we're willing to push this hard for business success. The idea of micro steps, because this is about creating habits and putting little triggers for us to build the energy, cement it with the anchors and purpose in our lives, and at the same time, understand how we deal with stress and have coping mechanisms to support one another.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There's so much information there, and I'd like to pivot now and open it up for questions. As I mentioned before, please pop any questions that you have in the chat box, because I know that the panel is very ready for this. I'll start with a couple that I have. I think this is an important part, and one we possibly haven't touched on too much, but part of increasing gender diversity for women, in particular in this month of International Women's Day, requires higher engagement of male colleagues. So what are some of your recommendations for further increasing the number of male allies? Arianna, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So actually, I think, first of all, it's so important that we don't see the question of gender equity as just a women's problem, but that it is actually a priority for everyone, women and men. And so that's kind of a new way of looking at it, because for so long we have looked at women to carry all the burden. Also, we are finding that as we are changing the culture of burnout that has fueled traditional businesses, what we are discovering is that women are leading the way here, but men are incredible beneficiaries. I mean, look at all the data about men with heart attacks, with hypertension, with health problems, because of all the stress and unnecessary burnout. But it's not just women who have to lead the way in all aspects of gender equity.
Absolutely. Deanne, I guess, Chief People's Officer, so from your perspective, that balanced engagement between ensuring the male allies are with us.
Yeah, I think recognize that this gender balance is necessary for performance. And with that type of an objective, it is everybody's objective, not just for women, to champion that, but also to have male allies, to be part of the brainstorming, to be part of this effort at the organization level. For men in particular, it's also to understand some of these unconscious bias, stereotypes that can exist. And by sharing these types of stories openly, I think it also helps everybody be more conscious and to be able to call out one another when they see examples of this behaviors happening in the workplace. I think we also need processes, because we can have aspirations, but how do we put that into practice and make things happen? So it's about looking at our processes on hiring, looking at our processes on talent development, providing the learning resources, the networks to create more role models in the workplace, so that these are more intentional steps. These are the routines and the rituals that can allow us to get to a higher probability of increasing women in leadership, women in the investing space, and particular challenge that is more prominent in the investment industry, in financial industry. So we have to actually push hard on this front.
Thank you. Sally, I'm going to pivot a little bit, because I do have another question, which in reference to your ninja discussion, this one's about, parents that have suffered in COVID from, having to work and parent under the same roof and the challenges there. Do you have any tips for parents on better management of this integration, and what as leaders can we do to support parents?
Yes. Look, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think it was only on the news this week. I hadn't realised in the United States that it's the full year anniversary of homeschooling and remote learning. We thought in Australia, we had many months of it, but it's been a full year, and so this is something we're seeing very extensively, and it places a lot of pressure on parents, no doubt about it, on the ability to work remotely and to support young children. It's definitely a pressure point. So I think, all of the things Arianna has talked about and writes about in her books is around self-care. I think that's a really important component. If you're not calm and taking care of yourself and you're completely exhausted, you can't be a patient parent to help make that happen. I think from an organisation's perspective, having empathy that is a pressure point, and that it is a consideration for a lot of people, and creating space for it. So at the FMC, we've done a number of things to try to create space for people. So mandating shorter meetings, workout times over lunchtime, being really clear about the extensive leave that is available for people who find themselves in different situations. A couple of very young children versus teenagers are different scenarios, both challenging but different. So really trying to meet those differing needs through conversations is what we've been focusing on.
Thank you very much. Arianna, we do have an audience member who's really, picked up your description of, being honest on priorities. And in this case, they've asked, being honest on priorities is important, but how do we encourage the male community to feel comfortable about saying they need to pick up the children, go to the teachers' meeting, etc.? How do we change the culture and perspective from that angle?
I love this topic because it's so much at the core of what working women, especially working mothers, are going through at the moment. In the States, we are calling it the She Session, with 2.5 women having left the workforce. The stress of being employees and parents and teachers and housekeepers all at once has become too much. So we are actually working both in the States and through Thrive Global APAC and in partnership with the HR Exchange on a program that we call Working Families, which really brings an organizational system to the home, bringing the same system that works in offices, which is an ownership system, to the home. Because right now, even when spouses help, and we see some of the same problems with same-sex couples that we are addressing in this program, what we see is that the spouse may say, "Can I help you, dear?" But that doesn't really help the woman, the working mother especially, with the mental load of everything. So just to give you an example, I don't want your help with lunch. I want you to own lunch, which means from conception to execution, all the way to completion, which is the way we divvy up work tasks. And then we've included, once a week, one-on-one, to see how are things going. We literally have digital cards that we advise the couple to divvy up. So I take lunch, you take the birthday party, you take picking up from school when the schools open up again. Whatever it is, if you divide it, you can shuffle cards again at the end of the week. But it means that everything is kind of organized the way we do it at the office. And a lot of people say at first, "Oh my God, doesn't that kind of kill the spontaneity and the intimacy?" No, on the contrary. What it kills is the resentments and the grievances that accumulate and really erode the relationship and the love. So we're very excited about that, because if we continue to wing it, the burden will continue to fall on the women.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And we've also got a number of questions about that workforce of the future and the plans for return to office. So, obviously a lot of organisations out there are curious about how the different organisations are enabling the return to office. So, I'll start with you, Diana, if I can. How, in your GIC, how are they arranging work for office?
Yeah, we see a lot of ability to work from home. But at the same time, we will see the office as the hub where work gets done in teams. And the way to think about it is to look at the activities that we have, right? If it's a quiet type of work, you can actually work from remote. You can work from anywhere because you want to concentrate, you want to focus. But in discussions and brainstorming sessions, to bring people together for innovation, for generation of ideas, discussion on how to deal with problems and solutions. It's always better to have people in the same room. So back where things are looking better in a more normal state, I think this would be the sort of balance we want to achieve. It's hard to set a specific target because everybody has different work priorities and activities. But if I think about it for myself, I would imagine that I could work 1 to 2 days at home, 3 to 4 days in the office, just given the type of work that I do and the need to connect with people. And to me, it's about outcomes. So where we provide that kind of flexibility, understanding that there needs to be trust and accountability. Then how we think about holding people for outcomes, how we think about also creating the support structures that enable that seamless ability to work in the office and work at home. So this would be how I see the workforce evolving towards a lot more flexibility, but also accountability for outcomes. And I think absolutely the care and empathy is important because everybody has a different situation.
Thank you. And Sally, from your perspective, bringing that workforce back.
Yes, so very similar themes. I think all organisations, are working through this. One of the things that we're doing at VFMC at the moment is really trying to listen and having good conversations with our people to understand what the longer term needs to look like, because I think we definitely recognise this is a long-term change. This is not just something that needs to apply for the next 3, 6, even 12 months, but this is fundamental and a big shift. And, work is what we do, not a place that, we go to. And so how do we rethink that? How do we make, I know a lot of people are talking about this borderless, workplaces. How do we ensure that people are set up well and effectively supported to work in whatever the environment is, such that we get these effective outcomes Deanna was talking about with those nice, clear measures that sit around it. And good people practice is always at the heart of that, I think.
Excellent. And we're coming almost to the end, but Arianna, just a final one for you. Obviously, Thrive Global is present all throughout, and particularly in the Asia-Pacific area. And we're aware that for some cultures where it may be more male-dominated, and the question being that how do we encourage this inclusivity and that diversity in some of the cultures that are more male-dominated? Just have to come up. Yeah.
Sorry. Has there ever been a Zoom without somebody being told to unmute? That's what we are finding, Belinda. And in the work we're doing with the HR exchange in the APAC region, when we look at the resilience in companies, we see the connection between resilience and diversity. Because again, what we need to understand is how human beings operate, and we can look at it from our own experience. I know that when I'm burnt out and exhausted and running on empty, I'm the worst version of myself. I'm more reactive, I'm less empathetic, I'm less inclusive. So magnify that and look at so many men who've been brought up a different way. And we are asking them to look at the data, to look at how you build thriving cultures and successful companies. We're not just asking them to do something because they're benevolent. But that requires building new habits, and it has to start with how we show up, as men, as allies, and how we show up, having put, as I said at the beginning, our own oxygen mask on first. That's why I'm really excited about recognizing this connection between well-being, resilience, and business outcomes, including diversity and inclusion, collecting the data and reinforcing it.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are at time. I could be here for a lot longer listening to this information. So I've got to start by thanking Arianna, Deanna, Sally. Thank you for your insights. It's been a tremendous afternoon. I had a note to, bring out 2 or 3 points. I can't do that. There is just too much good information there. But being recorded, I'm going to have to go back and go through it all again. I will say that we're going to continue to have these conversations and around the theme of diversity and resiliency, and certainly we're committed to sharing, research and insight for leaders for the future. We are going to welcome your feedback. So for those that have listened in, you will receive a short survey. And we do ask you to complete that survey. Included in the email will be some more resources and thanks to Thrive Global for that availability of information, but it's more to support the discussion that we've had today for leaders. So that will be great access for you. Again, I just want to thank the panellists. It's been fantastic. I want to thank all those that have dialed in and taken the time to listen. You all be safe, be well, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, State Street.